Joining us now is Frank Zaccanelli.
Frank Zaccanelli.
Let's welcome Frank Zaccanelli.
Live from the Real News Studios in Dallas, Texas, welcome to the To Be Frank Show. Your host, Frank Zaccanelli, has been in the world of domestic and international business and professional sports for 40 years. And as a former minority owner, president, and general manager of the Dallas Mavericks, he's been asked to comment on current events in the national news for most of his professional career. But what he and many others are really looking for is a place to find just the facts. Welcome to the To Be Frank Show.
Hello, and welcome to Dallas, Texas, and the third episode of the To Be Frank Show. I'm your host, Frank Zaccanelli, and I'm very happy to be with everyone today on this really nice Thursday afternoon. We're excited about the show today because we actually have a married couple out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that contracted the coronavirus together. And their paths did not go down the same road, but they have an interesting story to tell. And we're really excited about having them because in talking to a lot of the viewership and getting feedback, people are really interested in talking to people that have actually contracted the virus and actually fought it. So we're really excited about that today, and we'll be introducing them after I'm done with the monologue today. So what I want to do is I want to start out with telling a story, and the story is going to lead into a bunch of things that I really want to talk about. But you know, I grew up in upstate New York, and I had a family that was really an interesting family from the standpoint that they were professional arguers. And I've had people that basically told me, you know, well, my family argued too. I said, no, they're amateurs. The people that I grew up with were literally professional arguers. And what they would do is they'd all crowd into a kitchen, and my mother's side of the family were probably the biggest culprits. And what they would do is if they had to say something and someone else was talking, they would just talk over them. And then you'd have two or three people talking over everybody. And my father was in the middle of that, but he was really an interesting guy because I learned a lot from my dad when he didn't even think that I was listening to him. And it really all started out with, you know, hey, Dad, you know, who's your favorite football coach? Well, my favorite football coach, Vince Lombardi, of course. I said, well, okay, so who's your favorite basketball coach? Well, my favorite basketball coach is Rollie Massimino, the coach of Villanova, who ended up winning a NCAA championship. And so, you know, it started to take on its own pattern. So, Dad, you know, everybody in the neighborhood, when I was a young kid in upstate New York, everybody was a Mickey Mantle fan. And I actually wasn't. I was a Roberto Clemente fan with the Pittsburgh Pirates. But I says, Dad, you know, Mickey Mantle. He says, no, Joe DiMaggio. And he would literally go into the kitchen and he would just say, you know, DiMaggio like 20 times to get it in my head that Joe DiMaggio was the greatest player. And so you kind of get the drift. You know, he was an Italian immigrant and they were really excited about Italians, you know, really doing well. Well, I said, Dad, you know, who's your favorite politician? You know, who's the politician that, you know, you really revere? He says, oh, Mario Cuomo. I says, yeah, Mario Cuomo. Mario Cuomo was a three-term governor in the 80s and 90s in New York State. And next to Ross Perot, Mario Cuomo, in my opinion, was the greatest public speaker of all time. When he would give a speech, he had you literally riveted to your chair. And in 1984, he gave the keynote speech at the Democratic Convention, and it really outweighed any other speech that was given during it and didn't really help the situation that they were trying to with the nominee there because Cuomo was so powerful, he was so riveting, and he was just a phenomenal speaker. And my father loved him. And so, you know, we get to today's world. You know, here you have Mario Cuomo's son, who is the governor now of New York. And he is really in a position now to where he's been directly in the middle of the situation as it relates to the coronavirus. So let me take you through a little bit of a timeline, and then we're going to get into some of the stuff that we really want to talk about in the monologue today. So February the 2nd, Donald Trump stops flights that are coming in from China. February the 2nd. And I think that through all the ability to be able to really kind of understand that move, it was a good move by the Trump administration, and it certainly saved lives. But what we didn't realize is that Europe was already infected by China. And Europe was really a mess in February. But people didn't really completely understand all of that at the time. Now, on March the 1st of this year, Governor Cuomo, current Governor Cuomo, basically announces that the first case in New York City is a woman who had come out of a trip from Iran. This is now a month after what happened with Trump and China, okay? So now you're in a situation, I'm trying to draw out a timeline here because it's really important that when we talk about the coronavirus, we understand all of the moving parts surrounding it and how we got here. So in Texas, in February, in March, in Florida, in Arizona, it's almost a non-factor because the country is still grappling with trying to figure out exactly what happened here. You know, what is this virus that we keep reading and hearing about? So New York basically explodes, and it becomes the epicenter, really, not only in the United States, but pretty much in the world for cases of coronavirus. And it's all the stuff about we don't have enough ventilators, we don't have enough hospital beds. I mean, that's all we heard over and over and over and over. So now we're in a situation where you wake up this morning and you look at your news and you read your newspapers or you read the internet and you find out that we've had 50,000 cases yesterday in the United States of new coronavirus cases. And it's an all-time high. And a lot of the cases are occurring in the South, in warmer climates, where basically these climates had opened up and these cities had opened up, 3 or 4 weeks ago. And you're seeing incredible surges. And so what does Governor Cuomo do? He decides after pretty much he infects the whole country, because you got to remember again, the epicenter in the United States for sure is New York City in March. So what he does is he now bans 18 different states that have to require a 14-day quarantine if they come out of these 18 states. And I think we have a list of those 18 states that we want to put up. Here's the list of the 18 states. Now take a look at these states. And remember again, the situation as it relates to China gave this virus to Europe. Europe gave this virus to New York. And New York pretty much gave this virus to everybody else, because the epicenter for European travel is New York. Put that list up again. I want to go through that list one more time if we could. A lot of international flights coming into Alabama and Arkansas, isn't there? I don't know of one. Okay, I don't know of one. And Mississippi, you got a lot of flights from Paris going into Mississippi. Obviously, I'm being facetious here, but for New York now to do what they're doing and to shut down, and then you topple that with the Billy de Blasio fiasco, which we're going to get into him in just a minute. It just becomes something that a lot of the country really doesn't understand. New York City, tied with Rome, is the greatest city in the world. It's the seventh most visited city in the world. Okay, that's really important when you start to think about internationally, people from all over the world want to go to New York. And at this present moment, they've now shut down everything in New York again as it relates to in restaurant dining. And you've got still, they want to call them protests. I consider them mini riots, some of them, in terms of tearing the statues down and all the other stuff that's occurring. And you've got a mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, who basically is in unbelievable denial. This guy is basically, I mean, he does not like the United States or their form of government. And he projects himself as this incredible progressive who basically, ran for the Democratic nomination along with 20 other people and didn't even get to 1 percentage point of people that were backing him. He got nowhere, and it was a complete waste of time. But this man single-handedly, in my opinion, because I'm from upstate New York and I spent an enormous amount of time, and again, tied with Rome, the greatest city in the world, in my business life and in my personal life, he's wrecked the city. And if you take a look at New York City today, Governor Mario Cuomo, the greatest governor ever in the history of New York, wouldn't even recognize what he's looking at. And so this is the real issue that I think we deal with every day in the United States. Politics, you remember show 2, politics and statistics and the economy, all right? You're balancing all of these things. The job report came out today, and Donald Trump couldn't get on TV quick enough to report that the unemployment rate now has dropped from the high during this coronavirus scenario down to 11.1%. I think it was close to 20%. And they were projecting numbers that weren't as good as what came out today because people are getting back to work. And so the situation really then becomes, okay, so how do you balance all of this now? Because the numbers that came out today, the stock market reacted gigantically positively. But how do you balance this? How do you balance the politics with the economics? Well, let me tell you, the one way you don't do it is locking yourselves out if you're New York City and telling people from around the country that they got to go sit in their hotel room for 14 days. That's really good for business. I'd really like to talk to some of the hoteliers and really sit down with them and be able to say, what do you guys think about this? I've been in the hotel business. You start thinking about this whole mess that's created, and you wonder, is anybody paying attention to people that have to work, that people that have to run their businesses? And that has to be balanced again with stemming the tide of this virus, which again, in certain places in the country is exploding. So there's a gigantic dichotomy here. And that is the real challenge, I think, for the country and for the viewership here, is you have to open the country up. Our form of government, the capitalist form of government that we have here, does not allow for the country to be shut down over long periods of time. We can't afford it. In Europe, they have a different form of government. They have a more of a socialized form of government where the government themselves subsidize businesses and employees. We don't have that here. We had the one-time payment or the two-time payment or whatever that was, and we had that, and that actually helped people that were out of work. But now you can't continue to do that because then you completely throw out of balance the situation with the national debt and the deficits that we talked about during the last show. So that's really where things sit as of this morning, is that there still is a gigantic divide in the country between, do we follow these basic economic principles and how do we do that? Or over here, do we follow the political side that basically says, listen, we don't need any more people getting infected with this terrible disease. So now that brings us back to China. China. Who says China? You know, that's kind of a trick question. Okay, I think everybody who's out there knows who says China when he says China. But the Chinese, this starts in Wuhan. I had a guest yesterday that talked about, or I had a guest last show, Dr. Murray Cohen, that talked about the fact that he didn't believe that it started in a laboratory. Now, 30% of the people in the United States believe that it started in a laboratory. But let me give you just some basic statistics on China because they're really interesting. You can't get 73% of the people in the United States to agree on anything. Nothing. Not in today's climate, not in the political climate. But let me tell you what they do agree on. 73% of the people believe that China bears responsibility for the corona COVID-19 virus. 73% of Americans agree that China deserves a lot of the blame and responsibility for the cause of this virus. Okay? So you take a look at the statistics that are out there. You know, and that comes out of the Global Data Intelligence Company. A lot of these stats are coming out of websites that I go to when I want to avoid the political websites that put out a lot of information. Because one of the things that we're learning is that you can't believe any number that you hear. Let's go to China. China says the whole thing started there. There's 1.5 billion people, and China is now reporting that they have 85,000 cases with 4,500 deaths. Okay? Now, I've said, you know, somebody please call Elon Musk up, get him on the horn. I'll get on the SpaceX if that's true. It's complete garbage. All you have to do is go to China. And I've had the great privilege of going to China on 3 separate trips for long periods of time. I've probably been in more Chinese cities than most any American ever. I've been to over 20 Chinese cities, some of them no one's ever heard of. And this is not an indictment on the Chinese people. This has nothing to do with the Chinese people. This is all about the Chinese government, because you have a lot of people, whenever you mention China, these people are xenophobic. Okay, xenophobic. Oh, that's just, you know, you're picking on the Chinese because they're Chinese. I'm not doing that. And I hope that no one would do that, because that's wrong. We're talking about a government, a communist government, that has a real hard time telling the truth. Look at what's going on in China, in Hong Kong. I was a big studier of the transfer from the British in 1998 of Hong Kong to the Chinese. And that treaty was supposed to be 50 years. And it was called One Country, Two Systems. One country, two systems. If you go to Hong Kong, which I've had the great, again, privilege of being able to do, when you pull into Hong Kong, you know you're in a special place. The people are fantastic. When you come over the bridge from Shenzhen, which is the way that we came in, it was unbelievable, because it is as magnificent as any sight that you've ever seen. Well, take a look at what's going on over there now. I mean, they're rioting, they're protesting. They've now passed laws that completely contradict all of the situation as it relates to everything to do with the treaty. And the people are being repressed. Now, you'll remember, I want to say it was the end of last year, the NBA went there, and they brought some teams there, and they had a few games there. And China is completely obsessed with basketball and the NBA. And if you guys will all remember, Daryl Morey, the general manager of the Houston Rockets, who's a really nice guy, made a simple, unambiguous comment to say, I'm for the people of Hong Kong, that they fight for their rights based on the treaty. Well, as we all know, all hell broke loose. the Chinese government took the games off the television, and there was a huge problem now threatening the NBA. And all of the parcels of this were all surrounding China's inability to do the right thing. And when I look at this, again, China to Europe, Europe to New York, New York to the rest of the country. And when I see a ban from 18 states from Governor Cuomo, it drives me nuts that the greatest city tied with Rome in the world is in the midst of this under a mayor, Billy de Blasio, that quite frankly doesn't know his ass from you know what. So that's the whole problem here, is that the country is such a mess and so divided. Now, Mayor Bill de Blasio decides he's going to put his wife in charge of a committee that ultimately is going to now decide what statues come down and which one stays up. Now, I would suggest to you that that should be done by a historical society. First of all, the protests are important, and our show on Monday is going to be about Black Lives Matter. And Black lives do matter. And we've got to say it, and we got to believe it. But the protests now have gone over the edge, especially in New York, because there's no fear of anything. There's no fear of retribution. You know, de Blasio now decides that he's going to take $1 billion, $1 billion out of the budget for police in New York City. If you ask me, based on what I'm looking on, they need more police instead of less police. And if we think the answer to the George Floyd terrible scenario and the other shootings that are so unjustified, and I'm very happy that these people that are responsible for this are going to face the law. I'm ecstatic about that because it needs to stop. But disbanding the police only hurts everything in our country and everything that we're trying to do, and doesn't solve the problem of the Black Lives Matter movement. As a matter of fact, it makes it worse, in my opinion. And we're going to talk about that. So that'll be for, Monday and next week. So our governor, our lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick, is an interesting guy. And if anybody's watched him, he's pretty conservative. Let's just say that. He is pretty conservative. I really like the Texas governor. I think he's mild-mannered. I think he's very, very on top of things. Dan Patrick has an ability to become a little bit radical in his views. And I'm going to read you a couple of things that he said. You guys have probably read some of this. He was on Fox News last night picking on Fauci. I'm not going to defend Fauci. I'm not going to pick on Fauci. Some of the things that Fauci has said are right. Some of the things that he said are not right. And the reason that there's this scenario is because nobody really has all the answers. But, to sit there and blame Fauci, that's not what we're going to do on this show, nor are we going to embrace all his opinions. We're going to try to get the facts out. But Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, quote, "There are more important things than living." Now, he said that. So I'd like to get him on the show and say, all right, Lieutenant Governor, make me a list of those things. They're more important things than living. Okay. That's kind of a general statement that I think is nuts. But somebody needs to explain to me and everyone in the state of Texas and everyone around the country, anyone who watched the show, there are more important things than living. And older Americans, now I don't know what he means by that. I don't know if it's 45, 65, 85, 105. I don't know. Older Americans should accept the risk of dying from the virus. Now, go home and tell your parents that, and your grandparents. Go tell them that. Just pull them in a room and say, listen, Grandma, sayonara, this is not going to be good, and we had a great time with you. Go try that one out for size. But how a lieutenant governor of the greatest state in the country, which I live in and I've become a Texan, How can you say these things? I mean, this is an ideological discussion that I can't even understand. So I'd love to get a comment from them. I've got my people working on it now to try to get a comment about what exactly does that mean. And so that's kind of where we are. We are in a situation again where we've got a gigantic dichotomy between economics and politics. Job numbers up today, coronavirus cases up today. Is this something that we're just going to have to deal with? 3 months ago, I didn't know anybody that had this. Now, my family knows about 15 people that have been infected by this virus. So this thing is spreading, and it's out there, and we don't even know the effects. All the young people in the country, please listen. You don't even really know the effects. Are you going to die from this? Probably not. But you don't have any idea what the effects of this are to your immune systems, to your reproductive systems for women, for guys, you know, your kidneys and your liver. And we don't have any of the information that can determine that this is no big deal. So I think that people just have to follow the social distancing rules. They have to follow what their local governments and their state governments are telling them. I'm upset, obviously, as you can see, that the governor of New York is banning 18 states from coming to the greatest city in the United States. And a lot of people are basically telling me, we don't want to go up there now because Bill de Blasio's wrecked the city. So you got all that kind of working for you. So that's really the monologue for today. And we're going to get into a really great discussion with our guest today. And like I said, next week, we're going to really try to tackle really important issues about the Black Lives Matter movement, the scenario, what needs to be done, policing. I have a lot of opinions on that. So today's guests are Dave and Sue Strackhouse, live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They have 2 children, Julia and Steve. And they've been together for 37 years of marriage and 30 years together. They went to high school. And they both have pre-existing conditions. Okay, so we hear a lot about that. You know, well, you're okay if you don't have pre-existing conditions. Well, they have pre-existing conditions. Sue has asthma, and Dave had a kidney transplant. Now, Dave's journey through this virus was much different than Sue's, and so we're going to understand that. We're going to talk to them about what it was like to contract it, what it was like to deal with it, and what it's been like in the aftermath. So, Sue and Dave, are you guys there? Are we ready to have this interview? How are you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Well, how are things in Pittsburgh?
It's pretty hot up here, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's that time of year, and it normally gets humid there, I would think, in Pittsburgh, correct?
Very much so, for certain.
Yeah, we've lost the audio with Dave and Sue. Okay, we'll be getting the audio back. So let's get back to China. So we've got to deal with this, I think, in the country as it relates to how we deal with China. Russia is no longer the biggest threat for us as a country. The country of China, in many ways, is going to be the country that our children and our grandchildren are going to deal with. And again, when I talk negatively about China, I'm not talking about their people. Their people are fantastic. Excuse me. Their people are fantastic. I couldn't have been treated better. I couldn't have been received better. And we're talking about the ability to be able to, actually deal with the people. And I've had that opportunity. All right. My producer is telling me we got Dave and Sue back with the correct audio. You guys back?
We're back.
Yes.
All right. So we were talking a little bit about Pittsburgh and what's going on up there. So how long have you guys lived in Pittsburgh? Are you lifelong residents there?
Yes, we are.
And what was your business? Or are you still in business, Dave, or what was your line of work?
my line of work is the credit field, and I work for a manufacturer, so it was deemed a necessity. We had the ability and still have the ability to work remotely, which is tremendous. We were actually doing that well before the virus, so the company was very forward thinking, and there's a tremendous amount of flexibility with that.
Oh, that's great. And Sue, are you a homemaker and a mother? And do you have a business that you're involved with?
I do. I actually, aside from homemaker and mom, I actually work for a school district. So currently, I work in the counseling office as their administrative assistant in our local school district.
Oh, that's great. And aside from telling Dave what to do on a regular basis.
Every day.
Every day. All right. So, Sue, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell our viewers, everyone is really interested to try to understand this. Why don't you tell our viewers about how you and your husband contracted the virus?
So we're really not sure how we caught it or where we got it, but our symptoms were totally different as well.
Okay, so tell us about that.
So initially, we all kind of woke up one morning and we all had what we thought was just a simple allergy type of cough. And then from there, as the days progressed, we each had different symptoms. My symptoms, because I have asthma, I did get short of breath quite quickly, but I also started with a fever. I had some GI issues. I did lose my taste and smell for a couple days, headache, just chills that were like different than any other flu symptom that I've ever had.
And tell me the time frame of this again. This right around St. Patty's Day?
Yes. So St. Patrick's Day, March, that Saturday, by Wednesday of the following week is when we woke up and had this little bit of a cough.
Now, both together, you guys had these symptoms together? You
I
pretty
did not
much
have a
had
cough,
it?
ever.
You never had a cough?
No, I did
Okay,
not.
so Sue had the cough. So Sue, when do you realize that this is not your garden variety, kind of allergy attack?
So literally, I probably had these chills and fever symptoms for like 4 or 5 days. And then I called the doctor that following Monday and we did a teledoc conference because they weren't seeing patients.
Okay, and so does he diagnose this over the phone? Do you go get a test? How do you determine that you're positive to the coronavirus?
So exactly. So what he suggested is because I have asthma that he thought that I should in fact go get tested. So just later that afternoon, I was able to get into our local hospital through their drive-through service to get a COVID test. And then it wasn't until that following Friday that I actually got the call that I was in fact positive.
Okay, and so the actual test itself was not that difficult for you to go find and go take, because we've heard a lot about testing is very difficult and not everyone who wants a test can get a test. So you're saying in your circumstance, that same day that you decided, you were able to go in and get that test?
That is correct.
And how long did it take you, Sue, to get the results of the test back?
So the test was I had the test Monday and it was on Friday of that same week that I got the results.
Okay, and they said you're positive, and so then you knew that you had the coronavirus, and so at that point you had to make a decision. I've got to quarantine. I've got to do all these basic things.
That is correct.
Okay, so Dave, so you had a kidney transplant, and your kidney transplant occurred when?
October 25th of last year.
Okay, so I'm assuming that was successful, and you work through that. So you go to the St. Patty's Day bar, you go to a party, whatever it is, and you start getting symptoms about the same time as your wife, or was that different?
No, I would say roughly the same time. It was the St. Patty's Day weekend where we had my wife and I went out on a Friday. St. Patty's Day was the Saturday, funeral home on a Sunday, and then probably about 10 to 14 days after that, you get the typical flu symptoms. And for me, it was the body aches, some chills, considerable GI issues for me. Although I had a fever, that was one of the large differences with Sue and I. Mine never got to 100. It was in the low 99 area. I believe she was over the 100 mark for a while. Additionally, the cough really wasn't a problem for me. I was already working remotely from home. The further I got into it, and typically a flu for me lasts, a 24-hour, a 48-hour type of thing. This was 5, 6, 7, 8 days. And since I was working remotely, I had myself in a separate room. We were kind of quarantined already ourselves because we were remote. And I couldn't even get up out of the chair to, whether I was going to go downstairs to get something to eat or drink. I never lost my sense of taste or smell for food. I lost a good bit of my appetite. I dropped about 11, 12 pounds, I believe. So for me, I thought our symptoms were kind of different. At the time on television, they would talk about the big four. They kind of escape me now, but everything that I felt was common, typical flu, but it didn't run its quick cycle like it typically would with my body. Obviously, I was suppressed because of the transplant.
Okay, so your wife gets tested on that Monday. When do you get tested?
I believe the following Friday or Saturday morning. I went to get tested. By that Monday evening, they knew I had it, and I went into the hospital, checked myself into the hospital first full week of April.
Okay, so you go to the hospital because your symptoms are different from your wife's symptoms, which again is a gigantic issue here, that two people that get this thing the same way have completely different symptoms and different levels of problems, and the acuteness for one person is completely different than the acuteness of another person. I mean, that's really what I think we've been hearing, and I think that's the basis for your story, is that you acquired it together, but you had different journeys. So, Dave, take us now. You go to the hospital. Now, you go to the hospital because you really now are not feeling good.
Right. I'm certainly under the heat lamp, so to speak, because of the kidney transplant almost 5.5 months prior to that. So they take extra precautions. So I get into the hospital. I go through. Basically, the hospital had those current patients that were with COVID on one set floor, and we had tremendous care from our local hospital here in Pittsburgh, and the people would come in. One would come in, they had their gear on, and they would take it off. It was very disposable, and it was very solemn in a sense, because they left me alone, and it's only because they only came in when they needed to. If I needed something, but I'm not that typical patient where I'm pressing that button, hey, I need this, I need that. I was on oxygen maybe just the first 2 days, and then the final 2.5 days I was already off of oxygen.
Was that a ventilator? Excuse me. Was that a ventilator or just regular oxygen?
Just regular oxygen. No ventilator for me.
Oxygen where they put the unit in your nose and you're breathing the oxygen.
Just a little support from the nose. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
No ventilator. Now, were there people that were in that ward that were on ventilators?
I could absolutely not tell if they were. I was in my room. I think on day 4, I was there 4.5 days. I peeked out to ask something because I was already up moving around, and they said, no, stay in your room right away. So I really couldn't answer. They really kept everyone self-quarantined in those rooms, and I thought they did a wonderful job of just the nurses and the aides and everybody just coming in and just, it was a constant change of clothes. They were taking off the gowns and throwing them away, and yeah.
Yeah. So Sue, we'll get back to your situation for a second here now. So your situation is not as acute. You never had to go into the hospital. Uh, what kind of medication were you on, if any? Did they prescribe to you any medication at all that they said you
No.
needed to take?
I had an inhaler that I was using, but there were a couple days I could not even attempt to use my inhaler because my breath was just really short of breath. And they did tell me to stay away from ibuprofen. I did take Tylenol for my fever, but that was pretty much it.
So no other remedy, no hydrochloroquine, none of that stuff. You didn't take any of
Dave did
those.
take that.
Yeah.
Dave,
And I know that he was in the situation that was in the hospital, and I'm sure that his situation was a lot more intense. But so you stayed home, and basically every day you just, once you turned the corner, you got better. How long from start to finish did it take you, Sue?
it was probably a solid 2 weeks.
So 2 weeks. And do you have any now overlap today of anything that you can tell in terms of the fact that you had the coronavirus?
I cannot. I do feel back to 100% normal, whatever normal is.
Yeah. But nothing that's mitigating that would be a problem for you on a go forward that you know of.
That is correct.
So Dave, so now you're in the hospital. Is there ever a time when you're worried about, hey, this is really not good?
No, never. I don't like to use absolutes, but it was the same with the kidney for myself. I was never concerned about dying. I was a wonderful friend, Dave Linder, gave me a kidney, so I was concerned about living. And so the same thing happened here with COVID. After they gave me the I can't pronounce the name, the
Hydrochloroquine.
hydrochloroquine.
Yeah.
Yes. They gave me that. I can't say whether it was overly beneficial or not. You know, when they took me off the oxygen, I knew I had my wind back, per se. They would check me constantly, but it never came into my mind because I in my brain, I'm attacking life. You know, I tried to be as healthy as I could going into that transplant, which I was fortunate to know about. And then catching this, well, it was just, okay. I was kind of slow to get into the hospital. I should have went a little sooner, waited till my family pointed out, hey, Dad can't really breathe well, but I was sitting in the chair working for a good part of that time too. So so no, I really didn't feel that fear, quite honestly.
Did you? Yeah, go ahead, Sue.
I kind of did fear. I've never seen him so sick. I've never seen him actually short of breath. As an asthma patient, I know what that feels like. But to see him, who has never been short of breath, like I could tell, he needed to go to the hospital.
Yeah. Do you think, Dave, that your situation became more acute because of your kidney transplant? Is there any correlation that you can draw for our audience that pre-existing situation really had some to do with the acuteness of the coronavirus in your body?
Absolutely. When anybody has a transplant like I have, whether it's a heart, lung, kidney, something like that, your immune system is suppressed based on the medication. And generally, you're going to take that medication for the better part of the rest of your life. As you reach year one, post that type of a transplant, they start to wean you off. I've been very fortunate. I've been weaned off a little bit of the medication in this early stage already. When I went into the hospital, they had to completely take me off a majority of that medication simply to allow my own immune system to come back a little bit. Again, I'm because of the kidney, the transplant, absolutely there was an impact there because I have to be more cautious. I've been being more cautious 8 months before the transplant because I was on dialysis. I was on at-home dialysis. So, you know, the cleanliness, making sure whether you're washing your hands or wiping things off or just paying more attention, not even touching my face before that, that was already kind of etched in my mind. So I think it kind of helped me coming more so out of the corona portion because, we have a little more sanitizer now. We have a little more thoughtfulness, as do our children and the people around us, our friends as well. I mean, they recognize that we've had it. We've both tested negative. It's been almost 9 weeks. We went in and we each had the test at different times. We're both negative, but I still feel bad around our friends only because I can tell someone I'm negative, but there's so much awkward information out there. I'm back to normal. Whether I'm exercising, running, or just doing normal routine, I feel 110%. But once you've had it, there's still that little bit of a stigma. Should I be around Dave or shouldn't I? I personally, I appreciate being able to tell this, but I'd like to hear it also from more people that have had it and that have, like my wife, she didn't need to go to the hospital and she came out of it. A few of our friends have said, they think they had it around that time frame, but they never necessarily quarantined at that time. They just thought it was the flu. It came and went. There's still tremendous amount of question marks around that.
Wow. That's an interesting point that I have not covered, not thought about, not anything. The stigma that now is around a recovering coronavirus patient, especially one that had to go to the hospital and took medication. I've never really thought about that. That's such an interesting point and something that I want to try to find more out about. That's an amazing thing. How old are you, Dave?
55.
You're 55 and you look like you're pretty healthy. You married a 35-year-old, so your wife's 35. So, that's a wonderful thing there.
Thank you.
So, Sue, let me ask you, we've got a lot of people out there that don't take this seriously, especially a lot of our youth. And I stand by the contention, until they take it seriously, we're not going to stop the spread. And again, their position is we're not going to be, we're not dying, we're going to be fine. We don't really care about grandma and grandpa, and there's a lot of that out there. But what would you say to people that haven't gotten it and are just not following the rules? What would you say to them?
So, you hear everybody saying it's just the flu. It's just the flu. It really isn't just the flu. Because if it was just the flu, we wouldn't have as many tens of thousands of people dying from it. In addition to that, I took it so serious that I kept getting repeat tested because I actually wanted to donate plasma. Because they're saying that truly is the only way or the only thing right now that they know of that is truly benefiting the really, really sick. So it took me 52 days. They told me I was not contagious, but it took 52 days for me to truly get a negative test. And then I was actually able to donate my plasma because I did have good quantitative and qualitative antibodies.
Wow.
But I think for the young, you do have to take this serious because you could be asymptomatic. Our daughter barely had symptoms. She could have spread it to her grandma. They just don't know. They just don't know.
Now, how about Julie and Steve? Those are your two children. Did they test positive for the virus?
So back when we were being tested for the COVID, it was the third week of March. Tests were at a shortage. So they considered Julia presumptive positive. She never actually got tested because at that time, tests were at a shortage. So they just considered her presumptive positive. She never had an antibody test still. And Stephen, believe it or not, he's living in New York City. So he actually had the benefit of being able to move out of New York City after he quarantined and isolated for about 3 weeks or so after New York City got really bad, and he has been living down at the beach area. So he is out of New York City right now, working remotely as well.
All right. Well, that's great. So, kind of in closing, guys, number one, I really appreciate your stories are very important, I think, to having the general public really try to understand this terrible pandemic. And here's what's great about podcasting versus television is we have the ability on a show like this to be able to have you tell your total story where we don't have to cut you off and we don't have to rush you through a segment and we're taking, we're taking a commercial every 10 minutes. That's what's great about podcasting is that you get the ability to really get into something and really understand from the people that have been through it, that ultimately, have dealt with it, how it all comes together. Dave, in closing, so what would you say to people that are out there that, are really not paying attention to the rules? What would you say to them?
I think the important thing is just changing your habit is important. Changing the habit can be something as simple as how many people did wash their hands when they got home from the grocery store or go out from running errands. I had commented, I read about this a few times, probably the most contagious item that people carry around every day is their cell phone. And I typically now, at the end of a day, I take my cell phone out, I hit the foamy hand soap, wipe off the cover, take that off, let that sit overnight, and I charge my phone by my bed, and I just put the cover back on in the morning. That's one of the largest germ carriers that people have, and I've read that in more than one place. So doing those little things, I think is tremendous. That's as simple as I could do.
Yeah. Well, guys, I really appreciate you being on the show. It's been very informative. I wish you great health on a go-forward basis. And I think, Sue, what you're doing with the plasma donation is just something that everybody who has the ability to have the antibodies should be following in your footsteps, because I firmly believe that's going to be a big part to the therapeutic side of this thing. So you guys have a great 4th of July, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having us. Stay well.
Thank you, Frank. Our pleasure.
Right. Okay, thank you. So we get back to kind of the close of today's show. You just heard from two people that have been through it, different journeys through it, but have been through, contracting the virus and then dealing with the virus, the hospitalizations. The interesting thing was the stigma. That's really something that I never really thought about the way that now people look at you. Oh my God, maybe we shouldn't go and, we shouldn't have a glass of wine with Sue and Dave. So that was an interesting piece to the whole thing. But I think we've got to, as Americans, we're going to have to really hunker down here now and get serious about this. 50,000 cases today. We set a record yesterday. So that's just not good. And, you got to balance this thing. We're going to talk about this every time we bring the subject up. You've got the economics over here, and then you've got the politics over here. And you're going to have to figure out, what side of that equation do you come down on, and then how do you merge these things? I can promise you this. Whether it's the coronavirus, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's China, whether it's anything, if America is going to deal with the problems that it is faced with now, and we are faced with more problems than I've seen in my lifetime, division like I've never seen before, the elected officials of our country are going to have to find a way to check the hate at the door and come together and serve the needs of the American people, which is exactly why we elected them. And I'm talking from the top to the state and to these local governments. They were elected to serve the people. And we're not serving anything or anybody by being as divided as we are. And we're not going to be able to accomplish anything. So I appreciate everyone joining us today for the show. You can again reach us at the To Be Frank Show on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on Instagram. We got Instagram. So look for the show. Tell your friends that the show is out there. We'd love to hear from you. And we wish everyone who's out there a happy and safe 4th of July. And we'll see you guys on Monday. Thanks so much for joining the show, and have a great weekend.